This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. Another day and yet another bloodbath, at least as far as South African equities are concerned. The all-share index down by over 8% in today's trading session. And as the numbers you're about to see from the S&P 500 show, the bloodbath is clearly far from over. Most bank stocks in Kenya falling yet again. In fact, between them, over 10 million shares of Equity Bank and KCB were traded today. Most foreign investors effectively cashing out of their holdings. Both were down by about 0.5%. Earlier in the day, the central bank governor said banks will extend existing loans for individuals, SMEs, corporates for up to a year if necessary at their cost. But how big a hit will banks take as a result? That is a bit unclear at this point. Here's what's coming up tonight. Kenyan banks accept to stagger repayments for individuals and companies as they adapt to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Doctors in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, go on strike in a wage dispute. And the EU members agree to shut their borders to foreigners to slow down the spread of COVID-19. All right, then let's start with a broad overview of the continent. Across Africa, 33 countries have reported nearly 600 cases of COVID-19. Let's take a look at the numbers pretty much across the continent. Starting in North Africa, that is a region of the highest number of cases at this point. The bulk of them are concentrated in Egypt. Algeria's health ministry has now reported a 6th death from COVID-19. Authorities say they've taken several precautionary measures, including asking people to stay at home and closing border crossing points with neighboring nations as well. In Western Africa, confirmed infections have gone up slightly. Burkina Faso did record its 7 new cases and the first death among sub-Saharan nations. The patient was a 62-year-old woman with diabetes. In Eastern Africa, Rwanda has reported its 8th case today. The patient is a 35-year-old man from Burundi who was stopped at Kigali airport after arriving from Dubai in transit to Bujumbura. Central Africa remains the lowest with its number of infections. The DR Congo has confirmed 3 new cases. The health minister there said that all 3 are Congolese nationals, with 1 patient having recently traveled to France. Meanwhile, in Southern Africa, Zambia has confirmed its first 2 cases of COVID-19. A husband and wife pair tested positive after returning from holiday in France. Overall, there have been 15 deaths from this pathogen across Africa, and the World Health Organization is reporting 47 recoveries on the continent so far. Now, there has been a rapid rise in COVID-19 cases pretty much across the world. Data from Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Tracker shows that more than 200,000 people have now been infected worldwide. Outside China, there are now 120,000 cases. They're spread out across more than 150 countries. Italy has the largest outbreak in Europe, with a total case over 31,000. Spain is Europe's second most affected country, reporting over 11,000 infections. Iran is the worst hit country in the Middle East. That has seen the virus spread to all of its 31 provinces, with over 17,000 cases. New infections in South Korea continue to slow down to double digits for the 4th day in a row. On the Chinese mainland, 23 out of its 24 new cases are international arrivals. Only 1 new infection has been reported so far in Wuhan. Chinese officials report 0 local suspected cases. 85% of patients in China have recovered. Let's get back to the continent now. Kenyan banks are set to implement new measures aimed at assisting individuals and businesses affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Central Bank of Kenya earlier this morning announced that it had reached a deal with the commercial banks that will see lenders restructure their loans in cases where borrowers are not able to honor their obligations on time. Now, the move is expected to reduce the economic pressure on the borrowers, at least in the short term. Under this deal, banks will offer short payment reschedules of up to 1 year. To contain the spread of the virus, all banknotes received from banks will also be quarantined for at least a week. More fiscal measures are expected to be rolled out in the near future in a bid to cushion Kenyans against the economic costs of this fallout.
the banks will seek to provide relief to borrowers on their personal loans based on their individual circumstances arising from the pandemic. As you can imagine, about 28% of our loans are actually personal loans. And a lot of our people have borrowed as personal loans and they're using it for something. And also, you have those instances where they will probably lose their job or they'll be put on furlough or something like that. So in a sense, they may not have the cash flow to support a loan that they were actually servicing before.
We need to pull together as Kenyans and to see how we shall overcome not just the health crisis, but the associated issues that are most likely to develop. You all know our tourism industry is going to take a hit. You all know our restaurant businesses, our small traders who depend on imported goods, which are now delayed because of slowdown in manufacturing in various parts of the world. And all of these individuals depend on you in one way or another. So your understanding to the plight that they are going through is something that I truly appreciate.
Kenya's president and central bank governor there. Now, for Kenya's horticultural sector, this COVID-19 pandemic could not have come at a worse time. As more and more European countries impose restrictions on business and movement, Kenya's flower industry says that most farms have cut shipping volumes to under 70% of their available capacity, and a sizable number have suspended exports altogether. In 2018, the sector reported a 38% increase in sales to just over $1.1 billion, and that's just from cut flower sales. This outbreak is likely to cause rising revenues, putting jobs and related enterprises at risk. But April is also a vital month in Kenya's tax calendar. Usually as a balance of income taxes for the prior year have to be settled in that month. And April is just around the corner. So with more restrictions on movement and trade coming into effect across countries, what legal options are available to companies, even those that are providing what some would argue are essential services? That's a question I put to Beatrice Nyabira. She's a partner at IKM Advocates.
Well, I think, again, the context has to be considered. And it may be that you're not declaring a force majeure unless that is allowed in the contract. You may then be pleading a different sort of relief that you're seeking. It could be that you're saying it has become impossible for me to perform because I don't have staff. So, I mean, the contract has been frustrated, or some other form of remedy. Force majeure is very strictly defined, but there are other remedies that one could possibly plead, considering the current circumstances where we're seeing, for example, staff not being able to come to work. I think the borders, more or less, flights from certain countries are not able to come in. We're not receiving cargo at the port. So there are other remedies that one can plead, such as frustration. Following that, you must also demonstrate that, that you're willing to perform and keep your counterparty updated as to what is happening. So it's not enough that you would cite, some force majeure and then go mute for 2 months or 3 months. You must keep the other party updated, and as soon as possible, as soon as you're able to perform, you must notify the other party and resume performance. Now, that is just one option.
But what about the enforcement side of it? Because one of the main issues that always comes up when we talk about the Kenyan legal system is just how clogged the court system is. Might it be easier to actually go down the arbitration route to essentially try and resolve any disputes that will inevitably arise, as you point out, from having to renegotiate all of these contracts?
I think the good faith negotiation would typically be the first step. We wouldn't recommend court action because court action is really at the extreme end of the scale. So I think the best way to approach this would be for parties to meet and make good faith efforts to try and negotiate. And where they're not able to reach consensus, there's other mechanisms in between before you get to court action. Arbitration is one of them, but again, it depends on whether it's allowed or envisaged under the contract, because a lot of these arrangements are already governed by contracts. And contracts are very specific because they're meant to guide on what should happen in different scenarios.
Right. What about the tax laws involved? Because any business will have obligations to suppliers, but at the same time, you've got to deal with local tax authorities either on a monthly or quarterly basis. Is there any flexibility built into Kenyan tax laws when it comes to postponing payments, be that personal income tax, corporate income tax, value-added tax, and so on?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question because, interestingly, the tax laws do have provisions. I think the Tax Procedures Act has provisions that allow for extension of time, and those are captured in the laws. But however, let me qualify that because. For example, they talk about deferment of payment of tax, but what was envisaged in drafting the law was, for example, if you're hit by a huge tax assessment that you are not expecting. I mean, we've seen what the tax cases look like. I think in such scenarios, it was envisaged that you could approach the KRA and seek, to provide a payment plan to them, including in the case of other taxes. I think the law envisages that you could make an application providing grounds as to why you need some extension of time to make payment, and the commissioner has some discretion in that regard. But remember, this was envisaged to be a one-off scenario. It was not ever thought that all taxpayers, for example, would require such kind of flexibility. So while there is provisions, I don't think it was ever envisaged to be used in this manner.
That's a perspective from East Africa. Let's head south now. South African Airways has cancelled 162 flights following the COVID-19 pandemic, and the travel restrictions that have been put in place by the government there. This comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa declared a national state of disaster and announced sweeping measures that include travel bans to countries with pretty large COVID-19 cases. The ban is expected to start from Wednesday. A total of 38 international and 124 regional flights have been postponed until the end of the month. The airline is under business rescue. It has been grappling with operational losses estimated at least $1.5 billion, mismanagement and corruption and government bailouts, all of which have combined to weaken the country's fiscal position. The South African Reserve Bank is meeting to discuss interest rates in essentially today and tomorrow. A decision is expected tomorrow afternoon. The bank is facing growing calls to reduce the repo rate very aggressively to help support and revive the South African economy. Now, the bank did last cut the policy rate by 25 basis points at its last meeting in January. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with this report.
South Africa is facing a double whammy. The economy is in recession and suffering the impacts of COVID-19, the cost of which could be billions, money that South Africa doesn't have. All eyes are now on the Reserve Bank.
So we are actually calling for a 1 percentage point cut, and from there, the Reserve Bank must be quite clear that it is willing and ready to act should the need arise. The Reserve Bank could come in at some time and say we're going to inject some liquidity, but we have to be very careful about that because ours is a very fragile economy, and injecting too much liquidity could really destabilize it.
The Reserve Bank is being urged to make an aggressive cut in rates. Even if the bank reduces the repo rate by 50 basis points, economists believe a lot more is needed at this stage.
With the way things are going at the moment, we do believe that 50 basis points is going to have very little impact, and that would definitely imply that the Reserve Bank is ready to act again very soon. So we do believe that the interest rate cuts must be front-loaded. Do more now so that you don't have to do even more later.
Coupled with that, obviously, decisive intervention by the bank to narrow the spread, so to bring down the interest rates on the 10-year bonds and to allow scope for Treasury to spend whatever is necessary to protect the population and the economy of the country.
The Treasury might also announce extra measures to keep the economy afloat during this time.
So I would think the authorities, the monetary authorities, the presidency, the Treasury has to almost go on a war footing, spend whatever it takes to contain the spread of this virus and to make sure that it's not destabilizing for a long term, but it's just a short, sharp crisis.
This is the time for the government to take the lead, to coordinate efforts to really deal with this situation.
In the meantime, the rand has weakened significantly, pushing through 17 rand against the dollar. The JSE too has lost 30% of its value in the last 2 weeks. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right then, so let's analyse what you can expect from the MPC, at least in the next 24 hours. Professor Patrick Bond is an economic analyst from the School of Governance at Wits University. He's live in Johannesburg tonight with more analysis. Professor Bond, thank you for your time this evening. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that SARB did implement a rate cut tomorrow. How big an effect will that have? Right, I'm informed that we have lost that particular connection. Let's move on now to our company wrap. The South African drug maker Adcock Ingram has acquired Plush Professional Leather Care in a bid to diversify into less regulated products. The financial details of the deal, however, are still unclear. Plush offers an extensive range of cleaning products. It has a heavy presence in major retailers in South Africa and some economies in Southern Africa. At the same time, Kano Kobil has been cleared to acquire the Zambian firm Samfuel Limited following its procurement by the French multinational Rubis Energy. The acquisition allowed the further acquisition of 10 petroleum retail outlets owned by Samfuel Limited, and that deepens its presence in the landlocked copper-producing country in Southern Africa. Supermarkets in the United Kingdom have introduced a limitation on the number of goods that people can buy in order to try and tackle stockpiling during the COVID-19 pandemic. Sainsbury's and Asda have both capped the purchase of particular food items at no more than 3. People with disabilities and the elderly will also be prioritized for delivery of goods after purchasing them online. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. It's time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Nigerian doctors have gone on strike over a wage dispute. And South Africa's job initiative for young people is starting to bear fruits. We'll tell you how when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Nyang. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Doctors in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, have downed their tools indefinitely. This industrial action does come as the country is fighting to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. With the details, here's CGTN's Phil Ihaza.
At this government hospital in Abuja, there are no doctors or patients in sight. Doctors in Abuja have gone on an indefinite strike over the non-payment of salaries for over 2 months.
We issued management 14-day ultimatum, which lapsed on the 6th of March. And that 6th of March, we had another indulgence in general meeting where we even extended the ultimatum to 13th, based on the meeting we had with them for them to meet up the 13th, which is Friday. I told them that even after the 13th, that we will still wait over the weekend. If by midnight of Sunday or 001 hour of Monday 16th, our monies are not paid, then we don't choose. And of course, it happened, and we proceeded on the strike action.
The government made a new payroll system compulsory for all public institutions in October last year. Since then, doctors say there have been issues paying health workers on time. The Association of Resident Doctors says despite several meetings with government officials since starting the strike, no resolution has emerged.
We couldn't actually arrive at decision. And from there, we proceeded to the National Assembly. We had a meeting with the House Committee on the Health Services yesterday, and the Honorable Speaker, Honorable Femi Gbajabiamila, was in attendance physically. And he made an appeal that because of the global health emergency of the coronavirus, we should rethink our decision and all those stuff. Yes, I also told them there and then that it's not me as the president calling the strike. It was a Congress decision. I will also take this message back to the Congress.
The strike comes with health workers potentially in high demand if the coronavirus outbreak spreads. And doctors say there is need for better motivation for them at such a time as this. However, it is not clear when the doctors will resume work despite pleas by the government officials for more time to sort out the payment issues.
A prolonged strike by doctors could hinder the efforts by the country to curb the spread of the coronavirus. The hope is that the ongoing deliberations between the government and doctors can bring about an agreement soon so lives aren't put at risk. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
South African trade unions are gearing up for another potential strike over public sector wages. Now, this comes after they rejected the government's latest attempt to renegotiate a previously agreed to pay rise for the fiscal year that starts in April. The government had previously agreed to pay civil servants wage increases of projected inflation plus 1% for workers on the lowest salary band, inflation plus 50 basis points for the next level up, and so on. Headline inflation currently stands at about 4%. The Public Service Association of South Africa says the union is prepared to go to court to enforce the wage increase agreed to in 2018 as part of a broader 3-year deal. Still in South Africa, a management company over there has announced its success in employing 94% of youth staff under the YES program. Now, that program aims to not just grow South Africa's economy, but also boost employment opportunities for young people at a time when the headline unemployment rate in the country is close to 30%. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has that story.
IQ Business is the largest independent management consulting firm in South Africa. The company is also the largest business organization here in South Africa. It brought in a number of young people to their internship program as part of YES. YES is the youth employment initiative that is aimed at addressing the most pressing socio-economic challenges in South Africa, particularly poverty and unemployment among the youth. South Africa has an unemployment rate of around 27%, and the majority of those who are unemployed are young people. And so companies such as IQ Business are critical in bridging that gap and helping with youth unemployment.
So we're delighted to have made the announcement that our 38 interns who were part of our first conduct of the Youth Employment Service internship last year, 94% of them have been offered full-time employment. And it's probably the most exciting part about the Youth Employment Service is not the internship over 1 year, but it is the opportunity to create full-time employment at the end of it.
Craker says IQ Business works in conjunction with other leading companies.
We work in partnership with a number of organizations, for example, Microsoft, where our interns go through a really extensive exposure to Microsoft-based technologies. The consulting environment in terms of problem solving and team leading, many dimensions that really lead to a very well-rounded individual that we hope will then move on to becoming an active consultant and technology services provider in our
Fourth industrial revolution.
You know, I guess the energy in our business, at IQ Business, we'd like to think that we are a beacon of positivity. We'd like to think that the kinds of problems that our clients and business at large are experiencing at this point is something that we are ideally suited to work through. And in fact, the kind of adversity that we're facing at this point is something that requires a young and capable team to really work through and to maintain momentum. So that's what we're about at IQ Business.
The YES initiative takes the form of a partnership between government, business, labor and civil society. You listen to Jamila for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then Uganda is our next focus. The country signed 3 grant financing agreements worth nearly $100 million with the European Union. Now, the country's finance minister, Matia Kasaija, said that the grants will support 3 projects and programs that are meant to improve the standards of Uganda's produce. And of course, at the same time, it might see the country qualify for better exports into Europe. Roughly $50 million out of the total amount of funds available will fund the inclusive green economy program that includes developing innovative products and businesses that do reduce environmental risks in a significant manner. That's a key benchmark for getting access into the EU. It comes at a time when the East African country is expected to record foreign direct investments worth about $733 million that EU companies are planning to invest in the country, at least over the next 5 years. On to North Africa now. Tunisia's tourism sector had only just recovered from the militant attacks of 2015. In fact, it was gearing up for a record tourism season that many had hoped would make up for the less than stellar performance of other parts of the economy. But the COVID-19 pandemic clearly has other ideas. It's now left the North African state's tourism sector with minimal traffic, a steep decline in income, and that has left tens of thousands of jobs at risk.
Tunisia's tourism sector finally recovered from years of pain caused by militant attacks in 2015. Amar Jawani has been optimistic about this year. His souvenir business might also be looking up. But with the coronavirus devastating holiday bookings, the survival of his business is at risk.
I think of closing the shop. I'm thinking of looking for another job to earn my living.
Tunisia has confirmed that in cases of coronavirus, mostly people who have recently arrived from abroad. And the government has called for the closure of schools early for their scheduled spring holiday and stopped some international travel.
There is no tourism, there is nothing. This disease has been a disaster for the people. People can no longer afford food, people are in need and do not know what to do. They don't know where they're heading. If I'm making $3.50 a day and I'm supposed to feed my family and children, I cannot do this.
Tunisia has been gearing up for a season of record visit numbers that politicians hoped would make up for the gloom elsewhere in the economy. But with a drop in the forecast economic growth to 1% from 2.7%, citing the virus as the reason, the expected economic growth will be further strained.
I must say there is stagnation. Many reservations were cancelled, especially reservations made by large groups coming for conferences or big gatherings. Look at what's happening today in Italy and France because of this disease. All these countries are affected, which affects our tourism.
Tourism accounts for nearly a tenth of Tunisia's economy and is the second biggest employer after agriculture and provides an important source of foreign currency. The crash that followed the 2015 attacks caused the gross domestic product growth to slow to 0.5% that year from an expected 3%. It contributed to a sharp fall in the value of Tunisia's currency. The North African nation had agreed to a loan program in 2016 with the International Monetary Fund, but it expires in April, and the new government agreed in February after months of wrangling that it is now trying to negotiate a replacement. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up shortly. EU member states agree to close their collective borders to slow down the spread of COVID-19. And one bright spot coming through, online gaming is getting a boost as we all now have to practice our social distancing.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. European Union leaders have agreed to shut their collective borders to most foreign nationals, a move that could be implemented imminently. However, as CGTN's Tony Waterman now explains from Brussels, it's not necessarily the external borders that are causing the biggest headaches.
Brussels was really backed into a corner on this issue of closing Europe's external borders because a number of member states had already acted unilaterally, but it's really the internal border closures and restrictions which are causing the biggest headaches for Brussels right now. At least 10 member states, including Germany, Denmark, Poland, and Spain, are restricting access to fellow EU citizens. Hungary is taking the most restrictive measures. It's sealing all road and railways, as well as waterways and airports, as it, along with the other countries, try to slow the spread of this deadly virus. But the internal closures are causing major traffic jams stretching for miles at borders, and this has been now going on for days.
Trucks are allowed to cross the border normally. They only undergo sanitary control. At 2 p.m. today, the average waiting time was around 11 hours.
Those types of wait times are already severely disrupting the flow of goods and in some cases medical professionals across the single market. EU transportation ministers are holding an emergency video conference to try and find a way to fix this problem. They're also going to be working on ways to ensure that ports remain operational. 90% of trade with third-party countries and more than a third of intra-Europe trade passes through European ports, so having a plan in place is going to be pivotal. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
China's Commerce Ministry says the country's economy will remain generally stable in the medium term despite the economic and social costs arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. Officials say that the consumer sector, however, has taken a massive hit in the course of this outbreak. Retail sales, for example, down by over 20% in the first 2 months of the year compared to the same period in 2019. But as containment of the virus improves and new COVID-19 cases in China plummet, businesses are gradually returning to normal operation. Officials say over 90% of many sectors, agriculture, e-commerce, express deliveries, are now back at work. The ministry does not expect the virus to have a long-term impact. Germany's largest carrier, Lufthansa, says it's trying to make plans to try and keep the country supplied with goods despite supply chain disruptions that have been caused by this pandemic. Germany now has more than 9,000 confirmed cases. That's according to data from the Johns Hopkins University. CGTN's Iris Spitzer reports from Frankfurt.
Lufthansa's CEO, Carsten Spohr, has told Germany's Bild newspaper that the company is working with the German government to create what he called an air bridge to keep the country stocked with essential supplies. More than 185,000 flights have been canceled since the end of January as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. That's caused a financial crisis for Lufthansa and other airlines and caused further problems with supply chains because passenger planes are usually used to carry freight as well. Germany's foreign minister, Heiko Maas, also used the term air bridge to describe a $55 million operation by the German government to try and bring back German tourists who are stranded abroad because of travel restrictions caused by the outbreak. The term air bridge or airlift was originally used in an operation to keep West Berlin supplied with goods during the Cold War. Here, where I am in Frankfurt, the streets are quieter than usual because of the closure here and across Germany of most non-essential shops. The country's health system is bracing for a surge in hospital patients because of the widening outbreak here. Despite having one of the highest rates of intensive care beds per person in the world, the government, federal government and the states here have put forward an emergency plan to try and double the number of intensive care beds available. Ira Spitzer, CGTN, Frankfurt.
Boeing says it supports a minimum of $60 billion in taxpayer-funded aid for the aviation industry, which is currently reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic. This comes after the U.S. President Donald Trump said his administration would support the American company. The pandemic has eviscerated demand for air travel, and airlines around the world are parking hundreds of planes while cutting back on investments. The disruption is even more challenging for Boeing, given that the company is still struggling because of its grounded and troubled 737 MAX aircraft. It's not just the plane makers who are suffering, U.S. airlines are too, and they're also asking the federal government, essentially American taxpayers, for more than $50 billion in order to keep their operations going. The request comes as some experts are warning that airlines are increasingly likely to collapse as going concerns because of travel restrictions imposed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Sarah Walton reports from New York.
Airlines say they're facing unprecedented challenges. On Monday, a ban went into effect restricting flights from the United Kingdom to the United States, a route travelled by around 47,000 passengers a day. But there are now travel restrictions affecting nearly every continent. Analysts estimate that could lead to more than $113 billion in lost revenue for airlines, which ripples down to other companies in the supply chain.
You know, in the best of times, the airline industry is a very low margin business with a lot of costs that have to be borne. And if you start seeing revenue drops by 60, 70, even 85% in some cases, then the cash hemorrhage becomes unbelievable. So basically, the entire industry is very much at risk.
The aviation sector is now taking action to try to get ahead of losses. In the US, American Airlines is reducing international capacity by 75% until May 6th. United Airlines says it's had 1 million fewer customers than usual for March compared to last year. The airline is looking at job cuts and expects the situation to get worse. The group Airlines for America, which represents a number of US carriers, says they're seeking more than $50 billion of assistance. If granted, this would be the first bailout for the industry since the September 11th attacks in 2001. But even after the virus is brought under control, the effects for all travel could be long-term.
Consumers will take their time in terms of coming back to those cruise lines, casinos, etc. And we might even see a shift in personal spending habits if they conclude, you know what, I saved an awful lot of money by not traveling and probably wouldn't hurt my personal balance sheet to save a little bit longer.
Here in the US, the government says it's discussing various options to support the travel industry, while France, Germany, the Netherlands and the UK are also considering action. But the Centre for Aviation is warning that without coordinated global efforts, most airlines in the world will be bankrupt by the end of May. Sarah Walton, CGTN, New York.
BMW says that it will be closing its European and South African factories for at least a month. The German car maker joins Daimler, Ford and others in shutting down operations amidst this COVID-19 outbreak. BMW's factories in Europe and South Africa accounted for roughly half of the vehicles it built in 2019. Bavarian Motorworks is actually warning that this year's profits will be significantly lower as a direct result of this pandemic. The warning comes in the wake of Volkswagen Group's announcement on Tuesday that sales revenues are up by 7.1% to about $280 billion last year. Now, between the Beijing Auto Show being pushed back and both car sales and manufacturing slowing down even before the COVID-19 outbreak, March is turning out to be a very challenging month for automakers in China. CGTN's Lily Liu takes a look at how they're coping.
The month began with Geneva Motor Show cancelled and automakers trying to move the hustle and bustle online. Several major car brands have launched new models exclusively online. While these e-launches attracted huge global audience, some brands even said it was an exciting format that may be continued to explore further. For instance, Mercedes-Benz says that launching cars online does not only enable transmission of first-hand information, but also has the advantage of real-time interaction. Besides, China is a market in which digitalization is developing the most rapidly and most widely accepted, which is why car makers in China get even more creative in the online space. With the Beijing Auto Show delayed, they try to do as much as possible online now, including sales, model launches, press conferences. Are these efforts paying off?
I haven't seen any official figures stating the effectiveness of these measures, but I personally think it's limited. The automakers just have to do something.
As the spread of the coronavirus slows in China and shoppers gradually return, dealer shops are gearing up. The relationship between car makers and dealers has become more critical than ever.
We will need to support our dealers. We have introduced a slew of policies, including financial support, inventory adjustments, and loosening up assessment criteria.
Automotive sales in China plunged nearly 80% in February, the biggest ever monthly decline. This is the 20th straight month of decline and brought car sales to levels not seen since 2005. Could it be the end of a tunnel?
Well, first quarter is basically all set up, for which I predict a 30 to 40% drop. After that, we expect a turnaround and even flip back into growth in the second half of the year. I foresee a 5 to 10% drop in car sales for the whole year, and that will make 2020 the third consecutive year with car sales decrease.
Global automakers are racing to develop recovery plans. Daimler AG is working on a strategy to push sales during the remainder of the year to make up for lost volume in China. BMW said its China sales has taken a hit, but the company stuck to its target for increasing passenger car sales for the year. Nissan Motor CEO Makoto Uchida said that cost cuts could be deeper. Uchida promised to unveil a turnaround plan in May on top of a job-cutting plan.
The big question is, as the viral spread becomes a global pandemic, production and supply chains in foreign countries may be impacted, and how will the Chinese market be affected by that? That's a question mark there.
Yes, the global pandemic does add a layer of uncertainty in the auto industry. And just this Tuesday, Volkswagen became the latest of a slew of automakers to announce shutdown plans. Some say the industry is now in more pain than gain. But the Chinese market still offers so much more potential and opportunities that until everything gets back to normal, the automakers will keep doing all they can to make these extraordinary times meaningful. Lily Lu, CGTN, Beijing.
Right then, on a slightly brighter note, amidst all the doom and gloom we've been serving up in the last hour, the video game sector is likely to maintain its momentum this quarter, since the COVID-19 pandemic is forcing a lot more of us to stay indoors. CGTN's Chen Tong has this report on what's hot tonight.
DLE has been playing Tencent's Honor of Kings for 3 years. It's a multiplayer online game in which 10 players are divided into 2 teams for real-time combat. Several of his gaming friends had drifted away over the years, but now they are back.
Because of the epidemic, we could only stay at home, and it's pretty boring to watch movies and TV dramas by yourself. It's a lot more interesting to play online games with my friends. It also helps us keep up our friendships.
According to big data provider Aurora Mobile, the daily active users of Tencent's blockbuster game hit 109 million during the holiday, up 55% from last year. And that also led to a surge in the game's revenues.
Honor of Kings made about 1.3 billion yuan on 2019's New Year's Eve, and the figure for this year was 2 billion, up more than 50% year on year. The epidemic cut into a lot of festivities, so people had more money to spend on the game.
The overwhelming popularity of Honor of Kings even led to 2 server crashes. Tencent got the game back online quickly in each case, and is now improving their equipment.
The operator repaired their game systems and offered extra bonus content in compensation. They are now upgrading their server to prevent such problems.
Other mobile games, including Peacekeeper Elite and Omeoji, have also seen increases in usage and spending. According to research firm Sensor Tower, game downloads from the iOS App Store during the New Year break were up more than 27% year on year, and the revenue was up better than 12%. Console gaming has seen similar growth. Video game giant Nintendo says increases in sales of its Switch game console have led it to revise its expected sales volume from 18 million units to 19.5 million for the first quarter of this year. Chen Tong, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then, even as American markets continue to get hammered, let's make a quick run through commodities here for you. Dow Jones Industrial down by about 9%, pretty much the same pattern we're seeing with the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq Composite too. But commodities are also taking quite the beating. The US oil benchmark, WTI crude, that fell to $25 a barrel earlier today. The last time we were here, it was 2002, 2003. On the supply side as well, remember, Saudi Arabia is ramping up output to 10 million barrels a day next month. So we're looking at a massive supply glut here. Goldman Sachs, in fact, it estimates that consumption is down by about 8 million barrels a day. And it's cut its forecast for Brent down to just $20 a barrel in the second quarter. Today, remember, Brent was about 3% lower, $27 a barrel. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why the popular kola nut business is taking quite a beating in Nigeria.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Tanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Nigeria's decision to shut down all trade across her land borders last August and the COVID-19 outbreak that we're dealing with now are both combining to dampen trade in the country's kola nut business. Now, the country's largest market for this particular product in Kano in northwestern Nigeria is going through some pretty tough times. As traders there say business volumes have fallen drastically. CGTN's Deji Badmus reports.
It's the largest kola nut market in the West African sub-region. Kola nuts are brought here from all over West Africa and farther from Central Africa. But the Mariri International Kola Nut Market in Kano, northwest Nigeria, is now a shadow of what it used to be. Since the Nigerian government shut the country's land borders with its neighbors, far fewer trucks and traders come to the market to transact business. The traders say the situation has further been exacerbated by the outbreak of COVID-19.
Our business has really suffered since the border closure. Before now, we export kola nuts to places like Saudi Arabia, but since the outbreak of the coronavirus, we can no longer get visa to travel to do our business there. Besides, traders from around used to come here to buy kola nuts for exports. They came from places like Bauchi, Maiduguri, Katsina and others. But since the outbreak of the coronavirus, the level of patronage has greatly dropped.
The border closure has lasted for almost 7 months now, confounding traders like Lawal Abdul Mariri, who's been trading here for the past 25 years now, and says he initially thought the closure was going to be for a short period.
Some of the varieties of our colas are bringing from Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire and Liberia. So being that the border is locked, so we don't have that kind of cola now.
The traders now struggle to find buyers for the few kola nuts in the market. The local economy around the entire community is also struggling as a result. And the biggest worry is that they have no idea when the border would be reopened and when the spread of COVID-19 will abate.
Our prayer is that the government reopens the border so we can continue smoothly with our business the way we used to do it before. We are also praying for divine intervention over the COVID-19 outbreak and that Nigeria may be spared.
The Nigerian government has said it will reopen the border when it reaches an agreement with its neighbors on combating smuggling. Talks are still ongoing, but there's yet no timeline as to when the border will be reopened. And until that happens, the kola nut traders would have no choice but to continue to endure the downturn in business in their market. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Kano, Nigeria.
The Stellenbosch Triennale flagship exhibition brings together an array of artists from a number of African countries. The list of exhibitors tends to read like the who's who of contemporary art from right across the continent. CGTN's Yolisa Jamela filed this report.
This exhibition represents a body of inspiring talent, with artists whose work can now be found in museums around the world. The works are also curated into biennales and are housed in important private collections around the world.
Because it was important for us to celebrate contemporary artists from the continent, to bring some of Africa's finest contemporary art on the continent, because sometimes, you know, when you want to actually experience African art or art from the continent, you have to travel to New York, to London, and we thought, why not? Why not have it in South Africa? Why not in Cape Town? Why not in Stellenbosch?
The discourse between the artists is proving to be quite critical.
Not only like as them personally, but through their work, their aesthetic, their concepts, and see how artists are in dialogue with each other, that artists actually don't create in silos. There are always conversations happening at all times. If we look at Mahama's work over there, that looks more at, you know, the economy of death, labor, you know, and, you know, speaking from an architectural perspective and looking at the body as a formal body and also bodies as an informal bodies. What do we do with that economy of death and economy of labor?
The exhibition reflects artists who are considered unique from our African continent.
So there's different things that we're touching on. Some of the work is political, some of the work is like play and political, some of the work is more about being sensing yourself, sensory work, and some of the work is more about aligning yourself.
These artists from Ghana took the exhibition's theme, "Tomorrow There Will Be More of Us," and translated it into what he calls conscious optimism.
There is a certain optimism that I read in the theme, and I figured it is something that we would have to almost complicate a little in dealing with optimism, looking at what's happening across the globe today.
The exhibition is on until the end of April. Yolisa Njomela for CGTN in Cape Town, South Africa.
All right, then let's wrap up the program with a run through the currencies for you. So Kenya's president said earlier today that fiscal support measures are being considered. Exactly what those measures, however, that's not clear just yet. We'll hear later on from the finance minister, hopefully. Kenya, remember, though, is in the middle of its budget cycle, so there could be a significant variation in spending between what was laid out in the 2020 budget policy statement and what eventually does land in Parliament. The Kenyan shilling did weaken, however, today, going all the way close to 104 to the dollar on the interbank market. On the retail side, much higher. Ahead of tomorrow's meeting as well, the South African rand did fall to a new record low, over $17 to the rand. That's a run through your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today's up next from Washington, D.C.